Okay, ladies and gentlemen, if you'd like to take your seats. Thank you very much for your questions that came in. What we will do is take some of those, and then we will have the roving mic again to answer other questions that you might have. We've had a very packed day. We've got this session now with questions, and then we're going to round up with Dr. Patrick Dixon. We will finish in plenty of time, so do please continue to enjoy and engage. Right, so we have a very distinguished panel. Some of you will have met some of them already. Paul Perkin, who is at the end, who is a church leader and is passionate actually about these issues and has been involved in Biocentre, which was an offshoot of CARE, if I could put it like that. Dr. Kathleen Richardson, who is a professor of robotics and AI. Ethics and yes, haven't got it in front of me, sorry. But who led the seminar on sex, robots and relationships. And many of you were in that. And then John Wyatt, Professor John Wyatt, who is next to me, who has a very distinguished history of what's your title now? Professor Emeritus of
Professor, yes. Ethics and Perinatology.
Yes, that's right. But who also has developed a real interest in this area and is quite an expert in it. So we have some of your questions here, so I'll kick off straight away. And the first question is this: how will mercy, forgiveness and grace be built into robots / humanoids, if at all, if they're to be used in human judgmental matters? How will mercy, forgiveness and grace be built into robots, humanoids, if at all, if they're to be used in human judgmental matters? Kathleen, can I come to you first?
Yes.
As sort of working in ethics in this sort of area.
I tell you what, if a scientist set themselves that problem, this is what they'd do. They'd go and they'd try and look at the way in which people offered forgiveness or something, or mercy, and then they'd try and script it. And then after they scripted it, they would then put that script into a machine, and they would put pauses in, and it would basically be like a mechanical puppet. Because when we receive mercy or we receive forgiveness, we're not just receiving information from someone, we're receiving something much more. And it's a bit like the idea, when someone falls down and you pick them up, you're not just physically moving them. You say, oh, I've fallen down before. You're kind of reassuring the person that what's happened to them is not the end of the world. There's something more that goes on. So if we do that, if we start turning the emotional stuff into instrumental things, that's how they would do it. But I don't think it would work. We could never do that with machines.
Yeah. Would you concur with that?
Well, I think this is part of the great potential for confusion in this area, because I absolutely agree with Kathleen that what is actually happening in the machine is entirely algorithmic. It is simply working through a recipe of responses. The machine doesn't understand anything. It doesn't know anything. The machine cannot exercise grace or forgiveness. But as the technology advances, the ability to simulate these things, the ability to make it appear as though it is. One of the workers in this field is Sherry Turkle, and she has written extensively about it, very well worth reading as an author. And she says that children who had spent a long time with a companion robot, they know that it's not really alive, but it's alive enough. It's loving enough. It's a sort of, it's good enough. And I think I see a real danger of this. As the technology advances, the ability to simulate improves. And therefore, this, I think, is where regulation has to play a part. And one obvious suggestion is that any program, anything that attempts to simulate human emotions, compassions, must repeatedly, by law, tell you that I am not a human being. I'm not a person. I am a machine. You know, and that we insist that to try and minimize the possibilities of coercion, manipulation, abuse, particularly of the vulnerable, that machines have to tell us they are machines. You know, I just throw that out as a possibility.
So are you concerned with what John Cruddas said, that actually this is not being taken seriously in the debate amongst the policymakers?
I'm absolutely concerned about that, and I totally agree. You know, something I've noticed repeatedly is that the technologists say, "Oh gosh, we need to think about ethics. Ethics is something beginning with E. We need a course on ethics, and we'll find an ethics expert, and then everything will be fine because we've done ethics." Yeah. And of course, it's not like that. There's something much more profound and subtle going on here.
So, Paul, you want to come in there, but can I just go on from what I just asked John and then bring you in there? So that presents us with a real opportunity, doesn't it? I mean, what can we do if that debate isn't being happened? As you as a church leader, when you think about how you engage with your congregation and stuff, are there things that we're in a unique position that we can do?
Well, coming back right to the original question about mercy and judgment, I think we're in a position to clarify some of those categories. For example, to make the distinction between a physical judgment and a more personal one, a moral judgment, and therefore a physical mercy, if you're going to use that word, and a personal, moral mercy. It's interesting. I mean, this isn't new. Scientists have talked about tolerance levels for ages. You talk about a tolerance level in a bar that you construct. How much can you bend it before it snaps? Tolerance level. So you're using a word that's normally attributed to a personal characteristic. Now, we've always done that. I've got a bridge engineer in my congregation who always refers to bridges as she. She's a beautiful bridge, he says. And he builds some of the biggest and finest bridges in the world. And he knows that he's using an ambiguous term there. But I think we are in a position to make those kind of distinctions so that there is a difference between an impersonal, physical mercy, how much you can strain this without it retaliating against you or breaking, and a personal, moral mercy, which is of a different character.
I personally love that image. I mean, we women we build bridges, don't we? No, sorry, that's aside. Can I
just add something as well? Because all of us we don't have a fixed idea of something. There is not a fixed idea of grace either. It's something that you want to attain in a way that's eternal in your existence, in your experience. So believing that somehow you can frame it and fix it into a program, that's not human either, because all our ideas of compassion or love or caring evolve and are contextual. So it's not outside of us, it's always within us and between us.
Thank you. Okay, can I move us on to another area that we looked at today? And we have a question here in relation particularly to work. And Nigel Cameron referred to the future of work with less work and more leisure as either heaven or hell. I suppose it depends on what sort of day we've had. But work also gives people dignity, purpose, self-worth and identity. How will people have these if there is no longer work for them? Paul, can I bring you in there?
Well, I'd first of all just want to affirm that work is a God-given part of creation. I mean, that's part of our Christian theology for those of us who are Christians. God is a worker. He's a creator and a worker, a manufacturer, a shaper of things, not just a creator ex nihilo who says, let there be, fiat, but one who shapes and molds and manufactures and works. And that's built into us as the image of God. Now, our theology tells us that has been warped, broken, strained beyond all acceptable levels. But we're in the business of helping people to rediscover, to redeem work. And so, I mean, that's the basic framework. I mean, I'm not answering your question,
No.
but
But you're not a politician, so come to us and say, will you answer the question?
whatever it
Perhaps
takes.
you are a politician in another way, yeah.
If one extreme is the labour that tyrannizes and oppresses and dehumanizes people, the opposite extreme is the emptiness, the lack of purpose, the lack of vision and strength, which has no work. So we've got to help people to find something in the middle which is fulfilling and satisfying.
John?
I think this is a very pressing question, which is going to raise all kinds of issues, including pastoral issues in the church, because I think if many people are right, and I suspect they may be, there are going to be more people who are finding their jobs being replaced by machines. I think one of the things, just to think about the theology of work, is that what has happened, I think, in the church is that we have slipped into the idea that work is the same as paid employment. And I think we need to disaggregate those. They're not the same thing. And we need to rehabilitate the idea that work is very important and gives significance and so on. But you don't necessarily have to be paid money if you do work. And that what will happen in the future is there will be opportunities for people, there will be desperate needs for people to work, for instance, in roles of caring, in roles of creativity, in roles of one can imagine many others, but they may not be paid for it. And we need to... It's interesting, I think the problem with the term volunteering is that it's too... It's not a satisfactory alternative, is it? We need something... We need to find a way of expressing the seriousness of work and the commitment that is involved and the fact that this is part of our humanity. Vocation, maybe that is. Maybe... but nonetheless, we need to find these kind of words and ways of then, but pastorally, how do we turn that into practice? How do we actually help people made unemployed by machines to find new meaning and purpose for which they may not be paid for?
And there's not only paid and unpaid, there's also full-time and part-time.
Yeah.
There's contractual and self-employed. There's short-term and long-term visions for work. So we've got to engage with all of those. And I do think churches are in a position creatively to help people with all of those. We've set up something which we simply call the operations team for people who are looking for a really valuable and useful way of using their time when they're not in full-time paid employment.
Fantastic. Would you want to add to that, Kathleen?
Well, in the 19th century, there was a big discussion as well. So it's been going on for a very long time, this idea. And what Karl Marx said was that if you socialised labour, if you socialised the means of production, and then you allocated the resources to those who needed it, each according to his or her ability and needs. But he also, so that was about reconfiguring the whole structural organisation of society. So that might be something that happens in the future. But there's also another idea in it which I think was quite important, was that one person would be many things. And we tend to live in a very specialised world where we are specialised in our roles, and often your training to get in particular kinds of roles take years and years and years. But why can't I, as a professor, have a morning, working with the ageing populations or doing a round in a chip shop? And why not let the person who works in a chip shop have some insight into my life and maybe swap roles with each other to kind of develop awareness and understanding and more empathy between different kind of working practices.
Thank you. Very interesting. Well, we have a very deep question here from a member of the audience. So, following John Lennox's talk, what is your view of the nature of the soul?
I can answer this quickly. I don't believe in God. I don't think there is a soul.
Okay.
But thank you for inviting me.
Well, we're really grateful that you're here. I
Well, I
suppose I
understand.
want to go to you, John.
Absolutely. Ask the vicar.
You can't say that.
My feeble understanding of the sort of Christian framework is that my soul is really just another word for me, but me at the core of my being. So that when Mary magnifies, my soul magnifies the Lord, she doesn't mean that a part of me magnifies. It's just a way of saying I do. When we say SOS, save our souls, because we're stranded on a life raft, we're not saying, could you save a little part of me from drowning in the sea, but could you rescue me, all of me?
Yeah. Yeah, good answer. Well, as the doctor,
I think this is a very complicated issue. Surprise, surprise. There is deep and complicated philosophy in this, that Plato was the person who really came up with the idea of the immortal soul, and that he then said, he made it a comparison. There was this low-grade body, and there was an immortal soul that lasted forever, and that was the really important bit. And I think many historians of theology and feel that Christianity was infected by Platonic ideas, so that this then became part of standard Christian teaching, and the Bible, and in particular the Hebraic scriptures, were read through Platonic eyes. And therefore this Hebrew concept of this word nephesh, which is what the Hebrew word, which was translated soul, was then, when it was turned into Greek, it became suke, and then because it was in Greek, it must be Plato's disembodied soul. It all gets very complicated. And so the question is that language, is the language of the soul is now essential to the way we understand what it means to be human? And I'm not sure it is. I think what we all see, what biblical Christianity says, and what other people see as well, is that there is a material aspect to being human, and there is an immaterial aspect to being human, and that they are both welded together in the one person, and that we hold those two together. We don't try to separate. How precisely the immaterial bit and the material bit coexist and integrate is profoundly mysterious. And yet they're at one and the same time. We are seemingly fully material and fully immaterial. And the vision for the future is that actually we will, in the new heaven and the new earth, we will be the both again. We will be fully material, but with a physics 2.0 in the new creation, as well as fully immaterial, infused by God's Spirit. I mean, what Paul says, we will have a pneumatikos body, a spiritual body, but it'll be physics as well, because the resurrection body of Jesus was physical, tangible, touchable, and that is the vision we have. So I think we need, as 21st century Christians, we need to find ways of expressing this deep mystery of the physical and the immaterial together, holding together in ways which are faithful to the scriptures, but which also communicate to modern people.
that's very helpful. Thank you very much.
Just to take it a tiny bit further, so the Greek thought was that you could separate, you could atomize a human being into different parts. There was a body, and there was a mind, and there was a spirit. And actually, often in asking the question about the soul, people are really asking, are we a spiritual being, and what do we mean by that? So that's where the language gets confused as well. But the Christian view is much more of the human being as a psychosomatic unity. And that was your coalescing, overlapping, coinciding kind of language, that we are both physical and spiritual at the same time. And of course, as doctors, there's a whole trend in this direction as well, the integration of the treatment of a patient.
No, that's absolutely right. And I think one of the great insights, which actually comes from Christian medicine and Christian anthropology, what it means to be human, is this, quote, holistic understanding that we are physical, we are psychological, we are relational, and we are spiritual, and all of these things are united. We have these different aspects, but they are all united in a single person.
But they're not different parts
They're not
that can be
different
sort of disentangled from each other.
They're the different aspects of the one being.
And after your very quick answer
Yeah.
at the beginning, you want to come in?
Well, it's not about the soul, but it comes back to artificial intelligence, because people say machines think, for example, or machines can feel. And what they do is they take a kind of idea they have about thinking or feeling, but the reality is that we do not think outside of our relationships with each other. So if, and unfortunately this has happened, if you lock a child in a cupboard and just feed them and have no interaction, and you do that to animals, they can't develop emotionally, they can't develop cognitively, they can't develop their motor skills, because actually, while they might be born with that potential, it's only through human relationship that we develop it. So everyone here in this room is only thinking because you coexist with other human beings in a co-experience. So I guess that would be the immaterial that you talked about,
Yes.
our coexistence with each other.
Well, and I think in a Christian way of thinking, this relationality, which we actually have, as you say, this is what Martin Buber
Yes.
was grasping for, this something special about the I-thou relationship. In Christian thinking, yes, that's amazingly wonderful, but actually there's an even higher level as well, because ultimately that goes to the nature of God himself, who is also in an I-thou relationship. The persons of the Trinity are giving themselves to one another, and we are reflections of that. So there is some wonderful deep stuff here, and maybe the challenge of artificial intelligence will force us all to think more profoundly about what it means to be human, about what is different between this profound I-you relationship of which humans are possible and the I-it relationship we can only have with a machine.
It all comes back to relationship, doesn't it?
Yeah.
That's that fundamental. Well, we have very few minutes left actually from questions, but I am going to look at a couple from you if we have time for very quick answers. So those of you running round with microphones, right, the lady there.
Firstly, I would like to say a big thanks to CARE for organising this. I've been desperate to see Christians get involved with this subject, so thank you so much. My question is, and I don't know whether it needs to be answered by a representative Church of England or CARE, at some point the government will approach religious organisations or bodies to get their recommendations or feedback about AI, because that's just what governments do. If you find yourself in that position and you had to give 3 recommendations on implementation of AI in society, what would those be?
No pressure.
No pressure.
I think you've been thinking about this, and you should tell us.
What are your
we have to
recommendations?
end the questions there. No. Yeah. So the recommend. I mean, I think it comes back actually very simply to what we've been talking about today about relationship, and what is relationship, and what constitutes meaningful, healthy relationships for the good of society. And I think there is enough evidence out there, but also the positive contributions that we would say we can make as Christians, to actually say for the good of a healthy society, the relationships between human beings is something that is very, very fundamental.
Yeah.
And we need to be preserving that for the good of society, and how can we?
Yeah.
But I would want to add that we need, therefore, to find more effective ways of restraining the powerful forces,
Yes.
particularly the commercial forces, but also the technological, the utopian dreamers who are potentially dominating this move. One of the interesting things that I have come to sort of perceive, and several people have now said it to me, and that is that the UK has potentially a very strategic role in the whole global regulation of AI. And the reason for that is that it appears that the States is not going to be the place that is going to drive regulation of AI. It doesn't fit with their culture, and since it is so commercially powerful and successful, the US is not going to lead this. For fairly obvious reasons, China is not going to be the place that is going to dominate it. And so And it seems, therefore, Europe is the only place globally which can lead this. And interestingly, of the European countries, it is the UK that is leading the field. It's there are no other European countries that have put the emphasis on it that we have. So it's very, very interesting that potentially the UK could be world leading in terms of coming up with new regulatory frameworks and insisting on how these powerful companies are being controlled. But I think we need to work together, don't we, to try and work out how on earth we're going to do this. We need to come up with smart ideas, smart regulation, which will defend human relationships and authenticity, and will restrain these enormous commercial and other forces which are now being released.
Thank you for that. I really appreciate hearing that. And yeah, I want to work with you because I believe that. I might not be a Christian, but I believe relationship is important and that we ensure there's not inequality or violence or hierarchy reproduced and alienating people, which creates the distress in the first place, which these corporations then go in and pick, hoover up. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Paul, I know you have got to run, and I do want to bring this to a close at this point, so we've got a slight couple of minutes before Patrick comes to speak. But do you want to just, in closing, make any other observation?
Well, and I think it does flow from your question. The church has a tremendous amount to say about human dignity, about the radical equality between human beings of every kind, about the sacredness of human life. And we can affirm all of these things. We will come into debate and cannot duck the challenge at various points. So that when we see that secular society has as an overriding paradigm now in its whole egalitarian and human rights movement, a belief in the autonomous right to self-determination in regard to my own body, that's the point at which we then challenge it. But I think we've got a great role to play in clarifying some of those issues. How it is that you can believe in the sacredness of the human life and the equality of human beings in the sight of God. But ultimately, there will be a conflict between those who believe in the autonomous self-determination right that I have in regard to my own body, and those who say, no, we have a higher authority. But we want to express that in a way that the world can hear. It's no good just saying, you are not your own, you were bought with a price. We've got to actually show how the secular way of thinking is actually leading us into chaos and tyranny.
Thank you very much indeed, Paul, John and Kathleen, and thank you to all of you for your